Labour rights groups say workers in Asia's garment manufacturing sector have lost close to $12 billion in income due to the pandemic. That's because big retailers cancelled orders and asked for discounts as they were forced to close their stores. As Paolo Montecillo reports, it's a big blow to millions who are already working on poverty wages.
Shelina Akhter gets priority access to her nation's limited supply of COVID-19 vaccines. She's neither a doctor nor a nurse. But in Bangladesh, she's an essential worker, part of a vast garment industry that manufactures clothes for the rest of the world.
It feels good to be vaccinated. That's why I waited in a long queue for the whole day.
In the first phase of the localized vaccination project, we'll inoculate 4,000 of the 8,000 people, and we hope to bring in the other half in the second phase.
Bangladesh has allowed textile factories to stay open throughout the pandemic. The sector employs more than 4.5 million people, and its exports account for 16% of GDP. But shipments fell last year when retailers canceled orders due to store closures.
Our sales could have peaked over the Christmas holiday in Europe, but lockdowns were imposed there. So our orders were down 25 to 30%.
And suppliers in Bangladesh and the rest of Asia bore the brunt. According to labor rights group the Clean Clothes Campaign, 1.6 million garment factory workers lost their jobs across Asia in the year to March, and the salaries of those who've stayed on the payroll have been slashed. These layoffs and cost-cutting measures have cost employees close to $12 billion.
So what we have seen are temporary, in some cases permanent factory closures. So many workers were actually left without work and in many cases without income. And those factories that reopened, they did not reopen at full capacity.
The Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association says demand is on track for the industry to recover to pre-pandemic levels by October. But the Clean Clothes Campaign says employees are still going to be ripped off. That's as retailers like H&M, Nike, and Primark rake in billions of dollars in profit every year, selling clothes made by essential workers who take home less than $2 a day. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
Well, let's get more on this now with Anne Bienius in Amsterdam. She's the Living Wage Coordinator at the Clean Clothes Campaign. Thank you so much for joining us, Anne. Firstly, close to $12 billion in lost wages and other benefits in the space of barely a little over a year. Can you tell us, how did you come to those findings and who are the worst affected?
It's quite difficult to conduct research during a pandemic. So we had to rely mostly on media reports, reports that came through the sector, but also, of course, our partners in the different regions helped us a lot. We chose these 7 countries that are featured in the report because most information was available for these 7 countries. We have a live blog that we update every day with information that we receive. And from all this information, we try to get to a figure for each of these 7 countries. Based on the figure that we found in each of these 7 countries, we were able to calculate a global estimate. Using the figures that we found. I think on average, what we found is that workers have lost on average 2 months of income, which is a lot if you take into account that these workers already before the pandemic weren't earning that much. So not many workers have savings. So to not receive income for 1 or more months is really a problem for these workers.
It sure is. And who's to blame for this lost income? We know that the world's biggest fashion retailers, H&M, Zara, and the like, they don't directly employ these workers. So is it the garment factories themselves who do hire these workers who are responsible, or is it their clients, these big fashion houses and retailers?
Yeah, the argument that you're saying is exactly the argument that brands often use, that they are not the direct employers of these workers. However, brands do have the power and they dictate the prices in this industry. So they are to blame. And what we've seen throughout the pandemic now is that brands have first canceled orders in the very early stages of the pandemic. And as soon as production and sales picked up again, what they did was delaying payments, sometimes up to 80 days, for example. So that means that 80 days after shipping an order, they finally paid for the order, which is very late. Also, what we saw was that on average, by 12% less was paid for orders by brands. And already the margin on which factory owners are operating is very little. So yeah, a further pushing down of 12% is really a lot. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that brands are to blame for this loss of wages and income.
And we know that in the wake of the terrible Rana Plaza garment factory collapse in Bangladesh back in 2013, there was worldwide pressure for these big fashion houses to really put the pressure on these garment factories to increase safety standards. Do you think there should be similar pressure applied to these factories in terms of raising wages and other conditions, not just in terms of safety?
Yes, I think that's definitely needed. Unfortunately, yeah, there are so many things going on now, so it's difficult to attract as much attention as we got when Rana Plaza happened. But we're working on it. We have a big campaign called the Pay Your Workers campaign. Over 230 organizations have endorsed this campaign. And they are calling together with us for an enforceable and binding agreement that should assure that workers are being paid their normal wages, their pre-pandemic wages throughout the pandemic. Also that workers are paid severance when they lose their jobs, because one of the main findings of the report was that hardly any worker was paid severance pay when their factory had to close. And the third thing that we're asking for is for employers and brands to respect the right to freedom of association for workers. So we're working on it, and hopefully very soon brands will hear and listen to our campaign.
Okay, Anne Benius from the Clean Clothes Campaign, thank you so much for taking the time
Thank
to
you.
speak with us on Money Talks.